Hey everybody, before I take a few minutes to talk about the cameras that I use for filming the storms for the storm videos here on cubecompmtdx. So when you look at my videos, you may often see in the titles you'll see WeatherCase 1, WeatherCase 2, Porch. It's just simply naming which camera is used for the given video. For my storm videos, sometimes you'll see 3 or sometimes even 4 videos of the same storm, because I have up to 4 cameras going at one time, sometimes even 5 if I count the camera I'm recording with going inside. So let's go ahead and start by looking at WeatherCase number 1. Okay, so this is the first of my 2 storm cams. This is WeatherCase camera number 1. It's built inside of a food container that was retrofitted to act as a watertight case. Not completely watertight, but I mean it keeps the rain off the camera more or less. It has this big opening in the back for ventilation. The camera itself is a Kodak ZI-8. You can get these things for dirt cheap on eBay, usually around $20 to $25. And what's nice about these cameras is the fact that they do so well in varying environments. Like for example, these things, at least with these cameras, they, like this time of year, it's really hot outside. These things sit out in the yard and go for hours on end without any problems. No overheating issues or anything like that. They work really well. They have a built-in stereo external mic jack, which I use for running this stereo mic on the back of the container. I also have this camera 18650 modded. For those who don't know, I work on computers and also have some knowledge of electronics and electricity. So this camera normally would run on a little built-in 3.7 volt lithium-ion battery, but I have instead modified it to use 2 18650 cells in parallel. So these particular cells here are Sony 2200 milliamp hour cells in parallel for a combined 4400 milliamp hours. With this setup, this camera will record for about 8 hours, or if I go up to the other cells that I have, which are Panasonic NCR 18650Bs, which I think are 3400 milliamps a piece, put those together, this thing will go for about 11 hours, 720p. So what's nice is I can set this thing out and let it go all day. Now of course we're in the middle of the COVID-19 pandemic, so I've been home. I'm home pretty much all the time right now, but normally during the summertime I would set these cameras out in the morning on days they're calling for storms. I'd set them out in the morning, I'd start recording, head off to work, and these things would capture any storms that come through in the case I'm not home. So for example, a lot of the videos, the storm videos that you may see on my channel from 2019 may have been shot while I wasn't even home. So, speaking of which, we have storms firing up right now. So the cameras aren't going as yet. I just set them out on their mounts, and they will be going here shortly. So this one in particular has a wide-angle lens adapter on the front. These cameras have a pretty awful field of view, at least in the stock configuration. But this fisheye adapter makes it a whole lot better. It gives you a really wide view, which you may notice on the videos shot by this camera. And as I was mentioning earlier, the thing I like about these Kodak ZI-8 cameras is I did mention how they run without a sweat. And even the hottest of conditions, but also in the coldest of conditions. I mean, I'll have these things time-lapsing on days during the wintertime where we might have lows in the teens or 20s, And in the case that we get snow, these things are going when it snows. So these things get used year round. My WeatherCase cameras do. And the ZI8, it handles it. It handles it really well. This camera has a heat sink on the processor as well as the CMOS sensor, so it helps keep the CMOS sensor from getting as hot. So the only issue this camera has is the built-in timekeeping cell. There's a little battery on the motherboard in this camera that is supposed to keep track of date and time when you change out the batteries on the back. But that little cell has died, and I've replaced it one time, and the second one has already died. Not sure why it's keeps happening, but it's kind of annoying. But that's only a really minor issue. Other than that, this little camera has done really well. So in the past, I used to run a Kodak ZI6, and before that, a DXG 567V. But the ZI8, it's hands down, it's a decent little camera for this kind of application. And I mentioned the run times earlier. The reason why this thing does so well is because it deep cycles lithium ion batteries. I've noticed some cameras, they like to terminate at like 3.7 volts on the which is the nominal voltage of the lithium ion cells, but they really should be terminating. They really should be treating the battery as dead at 3 volts. The Kodak ZI8 does just that, which I'll be talking about a different camera here in just a moment, but we're going to go ahead and start this camera off, and you'll see it's totally forgotten the date and time since I last changed up the batteries. I just have to press OK, let it think it's 2009. Yeah, the year I graduated high school. And it's already set for 720p, and I got it where I want it to be, so now it's recording. And just close this right up, and this will be good for about 8 hours or so before the battery goes dead. And I should mention about the card that's in this. It's a 32 gigabyte card. This camera, usually I can get in 720p, I can get about 16 to 18 hours of footage on here. It really depends on the time of day that I'm recording. Oftentimes when it records at night, it goes a lot longer before it fills up the card, but usually I can actually go through 2 sets of batteries on this thing before I have to change out a card. So that's pretty nice. So we're going to move on to WeatherCase camera number 2. Okay, so out here in the other part of the yard is WeatherCase camera number 2, and I've already started recording with it. This one currently uses a DXG 5C0V video camera. Definitely not as good quality as the Kodak ZI8 for a number of reasons. And I will soon be replacing this camera with a totally new one. Well, not brand new, but it's going to be another ZI8, kind of like WeatherCase number 1. I just got to finish modding the camera and building its WeatherCase because it won't work in this one. So this one, I'll go ahead and pop the cover off for a second. So as mentioned, I started recording recently with this one, and this is a look at the camera itself. It's also 18650 modded. The battery holder is on the opposite side. Now this one I had to also modify it to accept an external microphone. The little hole in the side is where the original microphone used to be. So I got rid of that, and I soldered up and glued up a 3.5mm mic jack. It's a stereo mic jack, but this camera only supports mono audio, so really it's only using one of the 2 microphones in this stereo mic on the side here. So there's 3 big issues with this camera, and the reasons why I'm going to be replacing it. Number 1 is the fact that this camera does not make optimal use of its lithium-ion battery, or at least the 18650s. because this camera considers a battery to be dead at 3.8 volts or 3.7 volts. Because I can pull the battery, it'll shut off, I pull the batteries out, and they're still holding 3.7 volts on them. Whereas with the ZI 8 cameras, they usually shut off at about 3 volts. Because I pull the batteries out, they usually have about 3.2 volts on when I pull them out of the ZI 8. So this camera, it probably terminates at about 3.6 rather than 3.8 volts. But it doesn't make very good use of the batteries. So I have a little hack for that. I actually run, instead of 4.2 volt lithium ion batteries, I run 4.35 volt lithium ion batteries in this one. The 4.35 volt cells, their capacity is up at a higher voltage spectrum, so this thing will run for a bit longer period of time. I usually get about 8 hours of runtime out of this one, which is pretty phenomenal. Second issue is the horrible sounding audio this thing produces. Despite using the same mic as WeatherCase 1, this camera, the audio is terrible. It's over amplified and it's distorted, so when you get loud thunder and stuff like that, it sounds horrible. It's one of the things I never really liked about this camera. Now this camera here, I got it on eBay for like less than $20, and it was really just something to try out to see how it would do. And I mean, it's done okay. It's done okay. I'm surprised it hasn't died over. Surprised it hasn't killed over. Because like I say, these kinds of operating conditions are hard on these things. Like for example, today, here we have a storm coming. Now it's starting to cool off now, but it's been 95 degrees out today with a heat index of 104. So really, really hot for this area. So the audio, that's the second issue. The third issue is, if you look on the screen, you see how the sky looks just white. That's because this thing, it overexposes. Now you can see how this one adjusts just fine. You can see the clouds as clear as can be. That's not the case with this one. This one simply just cannot adjust down far enough. Now you may see this little moon symbol. That's because I do have night mode turned on. However, all night mode does on this thing is it just, when it gets below a certain darkness, this camera will enable slow shutter operation, which compensates for low light situations. So this thing does tend to pick up lightning a little bit better than my other cameras do. Now there's actually a fourth issue I want to mention too, is this thing is not very efficient with the use of memory. This thing, recording for 8 to 9 hours will eat up a good bit of a 32 gigabyte card. Whereas with the ZI-8, it makes a lot better use of the memory. So I think that about wraps it up for this one. So we're going to move on to the porch camera. Just a bit of relief we need today. A good storm. Okay, so here's the porch cam. It's another Kodak ZI-8. Now this one, of course, because it's on the porch, doesn't sit inside of the case, so it's just mounted right up to a tripod right here. And it films toward the, I'd say that's probably the north-northeast. So I should mention, this camera films toward the north-northeast. WeatherCase number 1, it films north. WeatherCase number 2 films toward the southwest. I usually don't move my cameras around that much. I usually keep them in the same spot. Now, of course, forgot to mention that the WeatherCase 2 over there, it's on a permanent mount, so I don't have to worry about having to fiddle with tripods anymore over there. So a lot of times I'd have to when I have to cut grass, I have to pull the tripod up, and when I'm ready to film again, I have to put it back out there, I have to reset it in the ground, and on hot days like this, when it's dry, it's such a pain to deal with. And that right there, it works perfect. It's a permanent mount. I can easily mow around it, weed eat around it, you name it. So it does its job. So I forgot to mention, WeatherCase 2 has a wide-angle lens adapter on it. More or less, I went to Walmart and I purchased there's a little kit in the electronics section. It was a set of lens adapters for smartphones. It came with a fisheye adapter and a wide adapter. And I just used the fisheye adapter on WeatherCase 1 and the wide adapter on WeatherCase 2, both of which required adjusting the focus of the factory lens in both of those cameras. Now these cameras, they don't have autofocus, and that's a great thing for this application, because especially at night, like the camera I'm filming right now, if I forget, if I use it for filming storms on the porch or in the house or whatever, if I forget to manually lock the focus just wanders off everywhere and everything gets blurry. It's just such a mess. You don't have to worry about it with these cameras because they're fixed focus. The focus does not wander off. Now this camera here actually has a fisheye lens, not an adapter, but an actual fisheye lens off of an action camera. It's kind of a Midland XTC 280, which that camera was not all that great. So I ended up scrapping it and I pulled the lens off of it, and it works perfect on the ZI-8. So this camera has the replaced lens and is 18650 modded. I have the battery holder up front on this one. Now this camera recently replaced a PlayTouch ZI-10, the Kodak. That camera, although it actually had great nighttime performance, the video quality overall was just not that great. The audio, however, was spectacular. But another thing about it was I could not fit a wide angle or a fisheye lens on it because of the way it was designed. Whereas this one, it was really easy to retrofit. So I'm going to go ahead and mount this camera up and start recording. And you can see it just simply sits right here on the porch. Nothing much to explain there. And there we go. It's recording. So here we are back inside. And sometimes I may post a video of indoor footage. And I'm usually using the camera that I'm filming with right now, which is a Sanyo Zacti CG20. And it's the same camera I use for filming the majority of the videos on Computer Channel. So Computer Channel watchers may recognize this room here. Usually I'll set this camera up on a tripod on top of this right here and pull the blinds up if I'm doing an indoor video. But there's one more camera we need to focus on before we wrap this up, and that's the action cam. Okay, so here's the action cam. It's a Runme R2, and it can record in 4K at 25 FPS, but I usually leave it in just 1080p. It's kind of hard to do this with one hand. There we are. We'll take it out of the case for a second and have a look. I have this one, and I have a DB powered D2, which is exactly the same camera, just with a different name on it. Now this camera here, I use these for filming storms and also filming like bike rides and stuff like that. So back in 2019, I uploaded some bike ride footage. I used my DB powered D2 to film that. These cameras are dirt cheap. You can get them for around $25 to $30, or sometimes even less than that. And so when I do my storm videos, and anytime I use these to do storm videos, what I do is I use this little clamp mount I put together, along with the camera's watertight case, to mount out on my fence next to my shed, and usually this camera is pointing directly south. And as far as the audio goes, since when this thing is inside of its little watertight case, audio is practically non-existent. It's really muffled, so what I have to do is I have to borrow audio from another my cameras, and usually I use WeatherCase #1 since it has a good stereo mic on it, and the sound quality on that camera is amazing. That's another thing about the ZI-8 is, as mentioned, it has a built-in external mic jack, and the audio quality is fantastic. It captures thunder and stuff like that really well. So this one, of course, is not 18650 modded. It just uses its factory battery, as well as batteries I have for it, and they usually go for about an hour to an hour and a half, which is definitely a lot less compared to the to my cameras with the 18650 mods. Okay, so you see this camera is capable of doing 4K. I usually record in 1080p with it, but the ZI-8s as well as that DXG camera can actually record in 1080p, but I usually record in 720p with them. You may ask, why is that? Well, it's simply because of two things. Number one, when it's running in 720p, I get increased runtime. So there's actually three things. So increased runtime. Number two is less file space, which would also translate to increased runtime since the card doesn't fill up as quickly. And number three, with both those cameras, for some reason, I don't know why, but when you record in 1080p with those cameras, the field of view, how wide the video is much smaller than it is in 720p. I don't get it. I don't understand why they design them like that. But I prefer to have videos that are that you get a better view, you get a wider view, and also I prefer the files to not take up so much space, and I prefer to get more video on a single run, if that makes sense. So anyways, I think that kind of wraps it up for the cameras that I use for filming the storm videos on cubecompmtdx. As mentioned, soon I will be replacing WeatherCase 2 with a new WeatherCase as well as camera. As the ZI-8, it'll be almost identical to WeatherCase #1. Now, the existing WeatherCase 2 and DXG cam I might still use on some occasions, but I figured I'd just go and put this together for those who are kind of new to my videos and may not be familiar with the cameras. It may simply wonder what my titles mean. You know, WeatherCase 1, WeatherCase 2. So hopefully that makes more sense. Hope y'all enjoyed this video. Thanks for watching.